Okay. All right. Give it one more minute. You can start it, I guess. Okay, ladies. Open your books to 203. We'll get through this last week's homework, hopefully. Okay, let's just open in prayer and we'll get started. Lord, I just thank you for today. We've come a long way this year. We've gone through a lot of questions, a lot of books, a lot of different reading. And today we kind of end that part of it. And I just thank you for the ladies that have stuck it out. It hasn't been an easy study for sure because it's complicated in places, and yet it so helps us understand who you are, how you set things up. Your plan from the very first was to engage with man even after sin, and that amazes us that you would even want to do that. And so I thank you for the fact that you reach out, that you want a relationship with us, and that we have choices to make in what that relationship looks like. I thank you for that. I just pray that your spirit would be here with us today, block out everything from the outside and the things Satan likes to preoccupy us with, and just help us to focus on who you are and your plan, and to see ourselves where we are in this plan. And so I thank you for that. Just help us to really be open today to whatever it is you're trying to teach us, Lord. And I know each day is a different, and each day we're learning different things, and we see you in different ways. And so I just pray that you would help us to continue to do that as we walk with you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So on page 203, she has you read 2 chapters of a book, Numbers. One of the things I wanted to say about Numbers, if you get a little bit confused at times on how they set up and they took things down, Numbers chapters 1 through 5 really explain it well. Actually 4. 5 gets back into more law, but 1 through 4 really tells you so out of the Levites, there were 4 different groups within the Levites. One was Aaron and his family, and then 3 other families. And so Numbers really sets out what their jobs were, what they were expected to do, where they stayed. Remember what I told you when they set up the tabernacle, the Levites were the ones that were the closest to the tabernacle all the way around the tabernacle, and then the tribes were just beyond them. It sets up, again, how they set up, how they laid out, how many were in each. We didn't cover day 5 of the last week, and the reason I didn't, and I'll sum it up, if you did page 198 and you drew out your tabernacle, and you put the tribes where they're supposed to be, what does it end up looking like when you look down at it? A cross. So the cross, because of the numbers of people, the east and west sides had the more people, so that was the length, and the north and south side had fewer people. And so as they walked across the desert, as God looked down on his people walking across the desert, what's it pointing to? The cross. The cross that's going to come a couple thousand years later, but where we are now, it still is in play, which I think sometimes we think God scrambles to figure out what he's going to do next when things go wrong, and God is not like that. He's got the plan all laid out. So the fact that he figured out in his head, which God can do anything he wants, to have the people march. Now, they couldn't see themselves marching. That's one of the things I wanted to tell you. When you filled that part out, they could never see themselves. They never saw the cross in it. But it reminded God of what the ultimate outcome was going to be, and that's the cross. And so even as Christ came to bear that cross, he already knew what was coming. He picked that specific time for that specific reason. When it says God chose the perfect time to send Christ, that's exactly right. So it's just interesting to see that even in these little things, everything points forward, everything, which is fun to look at, and it's great for us to see God's plan is being played out. Numbers 13 and 14, if you go to that, we're not going to read the whole thing because of time. We'll never get through all the days. But this is the point in time where they finally have gotten to the promised land. They've gotten to the edge of it. And God gives them a job to do. And it's interesting how he does it. So I'm going to ask you some of these questions. Hopefully you've written them out. And we'll put the story together by the questions that she asked. Who was to explore the land of Canaan? In page 203. One man from each tribe. So there's how many tribes are there? 12 tribes. So how many men went into the promised land? 12. 12 men went in. Now, it's interesting because I like how she does this next question. What questions were the spies to answer? What are the questions that you X'd on that part? Are they strong or weak? That's the first one. If you're going to have to fight them, are they strong or weak? What's the next one? Many or few. Are we bigger than they are, or are we smaller than they are? And what's the last one? Does the land have trees? Do you know why that is? They are going into a land where God promised them milk and honey, where everything was already ready. They have been in the wilderness since they left Egypt. So, again, it's a contrast to where they were coming from and what they were going into with God's promise. The trees tell you that the trees were big enough, old enough, and were bearing fruit already, so that when they went in to conquer the land, the food would already be there for them to survive. God had already prepared it. It was already there because that's what God does. Last question on this page, how many days did they explore the land? 40 days. Does that remind you of anything else? When I was reading that yesterday, I was reviewing it, and I'm thinking, 40 days. So 40 days, he already knew they were going to say no to the land. How many years did they end up in the desert? 40 years. And it's just like, oh, you guys are so dumb. Anyway, we'll not get into that. So she talks about what is the good news the spies brought. Yeah. What else? Was it? And fruit. There's everything in there that God had promised us and then some. It was amazing. So they could see the good part of it. Can you see that? Sometimes I throw the 10, I kind of want to say, oh, you guys are so dumb. How could you not see? And yet I realize, again, they had lack of faith. They could not see what God was actually doing, even though he promised them something and that promise was fulfilled. It was flowing with milk and honey and large fruit. What was the bad news? Yeah. Huge people, that's one, bigger than they were, and it's fortified cities. These are not cities you're going to walk into and take over just by walking into them. It was going to be a down and dirty fight, I guess is what you'd say. Now, God had a different plan, but I don't think they could trust that plan. That's how they felt. As they looked at the pluses and minuses of this land, it's very obvious that they had some issues with it, because what happens when they report back to the people? What do the 10 say? We look like grasshoppers. We are so tiny. We are so short. We are so ill-equipped. There is no way we can take this down. And yet, who silenced the people before Moses? Caleb. Caleb was one of the two. Who was the other one? Joshua and Caleb are the only two that could see not only the promises of the land, but could trust the God who had brought them out of Egypt to get them into the land of Canaan. So out of 12, only 2 actually believed. So what does it tell? The next question, nevertheless, the people argued with Caleb, and how did they react? What did they say? Yeah, they spread a negative report among the Israelites. It's interesting to me that, and I think it's a human tendency. I was trying to think this, when you see political things, when you see even other parts of the world where things happen and they start to snowball and snowball, what happens is a group of people, and it can be the majority, believe one thing and they start to disseminate the news that this is the way things are, that they can totally discourage even those with great faith. And that's what happened in this group. Even though they were the majority, they were totally wrong. God had promised them what? I will fight for you. I will do it. You don't have to do it. I will do it. I have picked this land for you. And yet the majority could not see that. Now, one of the things that you can throw them under the bus for, these are the same people that came out of Egypt, that watched all of the things that happened in Egypt to get them out, including the death of the firstborn. They crossed the Red Sea on dry land. They'd been fed manna the entire time. They had been provided water in a desert, and yet these are the same people that could look at this land and say, there's no way. But I think that's human. I think human people, we look at something and we say, no way. There is no way God can change this. There is no way God can do this. And we take it over on our own, and we usually fail. And that's just the honest truth. The next question, what was the result of the rumor they spread? They literally wept all night, which is really sad. Part of you would like to be a fly on the wall to see what the 10 said that countered what the 2 said. So Joshua and Caleb, I'm guessing, are talking the same time as these 10. And they're talking to some of the same people. And yet the people could only hear and see the negative side of things. As humans, aren't we like that, kind of? We see things very negatively at times, and we say, God can't do that. There's no way God's going to do that. And so they ended up weeping all night. 14:2, what was the exact words?
If only we had died in Egypt.
Yeah. How many times did they say that on that trip? If only we had died in Egypt, or in the wilderness. If only, if only. It's kind of like they would get to a place and there's no water. If only you would have let us die somewhere along the way so we didn't have to experience this, whatever I'm experiencing, because I'm thirsty right now and I don't see a way that you're going to bring water. If only I didn't have to do this. If only, if only, if only. And I think we do the same thing today. We don't always admit it, but we definitely do the same thing today. If only you would do this, then this wouldn't happen. If only if you would have gone back and changed that person, this thing would have happened. We're always about the what ifs, what ifs. That's where we get caught in traps, because God's plan is being played out whether we see it being played out or not. He's always at work, he promises that, and he's always doing exactly what he needs to do. So Joshua and Caleb, so check, what are their responses? What did they do first? Yep, they tore their clothes in grief. That was common in that era, not our era. And yet I've watched people not necessarily tear their clothes, but just absolutely wail to the point where their hair is being pulled out, everything about, I mean, they're a mess. That's exactly what that looks like. What's the next thing? Yeah, they wanted the people to know the land is good. It's exactly like God promised us. There is not one thing in this land that isn't what God promised. And then the next one, God would lead them if he was pleased. If we're willing to obey God, if we're willing to do it God's way, God will lead us. And he was. He was willing to lead them. What's the next one? Don't rebel. They've done that enough in this trip already. Don't do it again. You know how angry God gets. Do not rebel. Do not throw this in his face. Next part. What'd they tell him next? Don't be afraid of the people of Canaan. Again, you've got, I go back to where they came from. They came out of Egypt as total slaves. They had been slaves for years. That was their mentality. Egypt always had it over them, and they had never, ever lived without being slaves, all of these people. So the fact that God had gotten them out of that, it's almost like, why would you think, and again, I don't know how well they knew God. They watched him from afar, and they were terrified of him, that God was not going to put them back into slavery. He's not going to take them into the land to give the land to the Canaanites who already had it and make Israel the slaves. That's what they were arguing against. Don't be afraid. What did he tell them after that? Just before that. The enemy's protection is gone. Why is it gone? It goes with the last one, because God's taken it away. God had promised them, I will fight for you. At that point, the protection's gone. God is not going to fight for the Canaanites, the Jebusites, and everyone else that was in the land. He was going to fight for his people. And then lastly, they told him that the Lord was with them. They should have known the Lord was with them. And yet I look at us in this modern day, in the 21st century, whatever we're in, and I think we have the whole Bible. We have everything at our fingertips, and yet how often do we get so discouraged that we say, you're not fighting for us. You're not doing what I thought you would do. So what were they going to do to Joshua and Caleb? Stone them. I've thought about that. That probably surprises me more than anything, because Joshua was whose right-hand man? Joshua was not a little guy who was unknown. Joshua was always there when Moses went into the tent of meeting. Joshua was there. In fact, he would stay there after Moses came back from the tent of meeting. Joshua was the one that did a lot of this stuff in the fighting, when they were fighting in the wilderness. Moses, where was Moses? Do you remember? Sitting on a hill holding up his staff. And Joshua was with the people leading them in the fight. So they knew Joshua well, and yet they still were going to stone him. They basically turned on one of their leaders. How did God intervene and spare their lives? Of Caleb and Joshua. Yeah, basically the glory of God came down and basically stopped everything. At that point, as you can tell from when we talked about the tabernacle last week, when the glory of God went into it, once that happens, no one can move. No one can do anything. And that's exactly what happened here. His glory came down. And what was God's question to Moses in verse 11? Yeah. How long will you treat me with contempt? How long will you not trust God to be God? How long will you fight for yourselves instead of letting me fight for you? How long will you not see what I've tried to do for you? It's interesting, what was God prepared to do with Moses? Basically take them all out and start a new nation with Moses. He was ready to just say, forget it. I'm not going with you guys. You guys are dead. I'm going to kill you off. I'm going to start over again. Now, he did that later. He had already done that, I'm going to say, going back into Genesis. Where had he done that before? The flood. So what I'll say, did these people know about the flood? Yes, technically they did. Those stories were handed down generation after generation. In fact, the flood is an interesting story because as researchers have gone around the world, even within the last century or so, every area of the world has a story in its past that talks about a very large flood and a boat that saved people. So that story is still being handed down in China, in Thailand, in Africa, in Europe, all those places. That story is still around in their past because it was all verbally connected. And I think, Emma, you've got some words that come out of that same, in Chinese, that come out of that ark experience. So did these people know about it? Yes, they knew about it in their heads. They didn't know about it as they had read it or anything. It was just a passed down story. But again, they were not about to believe God. They were about seeing what they could see, and they were afraid of it. And we do the same thing. Like I said, I put them down all the time, and then I think, oh, Diane, you do that all the time too. You don't always see what God is doing. When he came down and he said to Moses, I want to start over with you, basically, what was he prepared to do? That next question. Yeah, kill them and disinherit them. I'm done with you guys. I'm tired of dealing with your rebellion. And he was going to make, next question, Moses with a new people. The basis of Moses' plea for God to spare their lives was what? God's reputation. I love that because Moses didn't try to argue with God that these people are decent people, don't kill them. He said, no, it's your reputation that's going to be ruined. It's you that is going to look bad, not these people that you're going to destroy. I think Moses technically was fed up with them too. But what he realized is the glory of God would not show if God did that. Now, what I'll tell you, God never had intended to do that. What God intended was exactly what happened, is for Moses to say, to your glory, you need to save these people. And that's what he did. He already knew Moses was going to do that. He set it up so that Moses could glorify God in what he said. He does the same for us. There's times where someone will ask you a question about your life or something that's going on in your life, and you are allowed to give glory to God even though you're kind of surprised that you're allowed to do it. I was reading the message from the missionaries we support in England, and they are saying they're still doing Easter specials in the schools in England, and they're working with Arabic people to explain Easter. They're still allowed to do that. I think, one, it surprises them, it surprises me, and yet that's exactly what God does, and that's what he did here. It's like, nope, I know what I'm doing. I'm already setting it up so that not only do I get the glory, but people will learn from it, and that's really what he did. So when Moses pled that, what was God's reply in verse 20? I will pardon them. And it's basically, I will pardon them, but they're going to pay for the consequences of their rebellion. That's really the answer that would happen. How many times had the Israelites tempted or tested God? 10. What does 10 correspond with? 10 commandments. Isn't that interesting? The basic 10 commandments that we still know, 10 basics, and God is interesting with numbers. He uses the same numbers over and over again, and yet the people are the ones that did it. They had complained 10 times in the very short time they'd been in the wilderness. Now, at this point, they've only been in the wilderness, and I think I looked it up before and I've kind of forgotten, but I think it's within 2 years. It's like a year and a half of time since the time they left Egypt to the time they've gotten to the Promised Land. Some of it was they went the long way around because God had to prepare them to fight. He was also teaching them that he was going to do stuff with them all the time. He was going to feed them. He was going to water them. He was going to make sure they're okay. He was going to walk alongside them. So he's basically building into them a nation, because they weren't a nation before. They were a group of Jews who didn't even know each other. In fact, slaves wouldn't, unless you lived next to the other slave, you would not know them. You had no time to do that. There was no social time. Like years ago, I was reading a book, and I know it was a pretend book. I mean, it was not totally true, but it came out of this time. But they went back into the time of what slavery looked like in the Near East, which would have been Egypt, and said, they had no rights. You had no time for yourself. Men and women were always working 24/7, 7 days a week. If you look at Egypt today, some of the things they don't know how were built, a lot of the cities, a lot of the big blocks that were built to surround their cities, the tombs, the city of the pharaohs that are all tombs that have these massive places built into them, some of those come from the time of the Jews in Egypt. And so what were they doing? Some of them were working in rock quarries. Some of them were, raising rice. Some of them were working with the fields, with they were shepherds. They were doing all kinds of stuff. Do you remember what the women who were delivering babies said about the women of Israel, of Jews? Do you remember what they said? They deliver in the field, not like the Egyptian women. They do it before we even get there. That tells you what the women were doing. The women were not homebodies. They were out working too. And probably so were the kids. So again, if you're a slave, if you go back to slavery in the U.S. and you read books about what it was like, that's exactly what it was like. You had no rights. You were not even considered really a person. You were something. And yet God allowed it to bring them up. And yet, what was Egypt so afraid of? Go back to when they were afraid of, and they put him into slavery. They had forgotten Joseph for one thing. What was the second thing? Do you remember? Their numbers. There was too many of them. Oh my word. They're multiplying and all over the place. And the Egyptians were not multiplying. And so there was more Jews at that point than there were Egyptians. And they were afraid that they would turn with another country on Egypt. So God had his plan all the way through, and yet the people of Israel complained constantly, kind of like we do. God forgave the sin, but he did not remove the sin's repercussions. What did he have them do? Or what did he say to them? Now, these are to the adults. Okay. Yeah. Basically, I'll make it quicker than this. I'm going to kill all the adults off, and your children are going to go into the land. Go into the land. The children will go into the land with me. All the adults are going to die. So for 40 years, you're going to wander in this desert, and you're going to end up dying there, and you're not going to be able to see the land. And that's the next question. Their children would enjoy the land their fathers had rejected. The next part is very interesting. It's almost like the adult Israelites woke up, realized what they'd done to God, and at that point, what did they do? Yeah, they tried to take the land themselves. Okay, we blew it. We want to be in the land. We don't want to die in the desert. We're going to go take over the land, and we're going to trust God will fight with us. But the problem is God didn't fight with them. He allowed them to be defeated. Consequences are consequences. So it's interesting as we look at that, it's why does God do what he does? Why does God bring bad things into some of our lives? All of our lives. There's not one of you out here today or watching that haven't had bad things, either recently or fairly recently. And if you haven't had, be prepared because there will be some coming. That's just the way of the world. What is he doing with us as Christians? What's he trying to do? Preparing us, he's growing us up into himself. When are the times I pray the most? It's when I'm in the deepest junk of life. Things happen, and you can be really happy for a long period of time and everything's going great, and then all of a sudden things start to go wrong. When do you find yourself praying more? In the times when things go wrong. That's who we are as people. So the next part takes us to is in Deuteronomy. So we're going to go back to Deuteronomy 31, which isn't too far back. Near the end. And if someone wants to read verses 2 and 3 and 16 through 18.
Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I'm no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. And then 16 through 18. And the Lord said to Moses, you are going to rest with your fathers, and these people will soon prostitute themselves to the foreign gods of the land they are entering. They will forsake me and break the covenant I made with them. On that day, I will become angry with them and forsake them. I will hide my face from them, and they will be destroyed. Many disasters and difficulties will come upon them, and on that day they will ask, have not these disasters come upon us because our God is not with us? And I will certainly hide my face on that day because of all their wickedness in turning to other gods.
Now, you have to know where this is being stated. If you look at your book of Deuteronomy, if you go over about 2 pages, you're at the very end of Deuteronomy. This is the end of the first 5 books of the Bible. It's the end of the story of the getting to the promised land. And the next book after that is Joshua, which tells you what that's going to be. That's going to be Joshua leading the children of Israel into the land. But this is God's last words to Moses, and it's also Moses' last words to Israel. So what does he say to the people of Israel? How old was he? 120. I've done enough. So it's kind of like if you think of Moses' life, it's in category of 3. The first 40 years were spent in Egypt in the palace. From the time he was an infant till he was 40 years old, he was in the palace, being educated, being taught, learning the ways of Egypt, which was probably the most educated nation of that time. Then the next 40 years, he's a runaway, and where is he now? What does he become? Shepherd in the wilderness. So for 40 years, to take him up to 80 years old, he becomes a shepherd in the wilderness, and then now he's 120, so we add another 40 years, and what has he just done for these 40 years? Wandered in the desert with the ones that are going to be killed off. And now he's also talking to the kids. And God is warning Moses. It's interesting how he tells, it's kind of like with Abraham. When you have a close relationship with God, God tells you things that he might not tell someone else that only has a very casual relationship with him. But he literally told Moses, these same people that are going into the promised land are going to basically turn their back on me. They're going to start worshiping the gods of the other lands, and at some point I'm going to turn my back on them. And that's literally the Old Testament. If you go through all of the Old Testament, that's exactly what happens until you get to the end when you get to Matthew, and it kind of changes scene, but they're still scattered among the nations. So even though they technically got back into the land, they never owned it again, they never became theirs again until 1940, they were a wandering people and have been ever since, which is sad, but it was their choice. I've looked at that often and thought to myself, every day I make choices on my relationship with God. Every day I make choices about how intimate to be with Him, how close, how much time I want to spend with Him, what I want to say to Him, how many times I enter into the holiest place, which is His throne room, to talk to Him. All of those things are choices I daily make. And if I'm not walking close with God, the less I'm going to hear from Him. The closer I walk with Him, the more I'm going to hear from Him. That is just a fact of life. And that's exactly what Moses did. And because Moses was considered God's friend and God honored Moses, God told him the end of the story, which is sad. And yet I have a feeling Moses already knew it after wandering in the desert for 40 years with these people. There's no way he couldn't have known. They're a hard, stiff-necked people.
How come they were so old? I mean, 120, how does that, I don't get it. We're not going to make it to 120, so how did they make it to 120?
Not very often do you hear even people in the hundreds anymore. Well, if you go back to Genesis, they lived to almost 1,000 years. Methuselah, 900 and some years. There were different times where God allowed people to live longer. David died at the great old age of 60. So all of his chosen ones, so if you look at Noah, Moses, David, Saul was a chosen one of God until he rebelled. They all die at different times because God's got different plans in their lives. And how did Moses get to that age? God allowed him to. Caleb's going to be another one. If you go through the book of Joshua, by the time Joshua and Caleb died, they're about that age too. They're really up there in age. Now, the younger guys were not. When they got into the land, they did not live that long. And then when you get through the time Judges, they died younger and younger because they were always fighting. They were always rebelling against God, then going back to God. So if you really want to track people in the Bible, some of them definitely live longer than others. But those are all God's choices. Like He says to us, what are you worried about? I know the day you were born, and I know the day you're going to die. I've got it. Well, yeah, we are going to live forever in heaven, but we still have to get through life here first. That's the unfortunate part. I'm ready to go to heaven now, but He obviously is not ready to take me. But that is who God is. So He did warn Moses that these Israelites who are going to take the land, who are going to obey, still are going to get themselves in deep trouble, and they're going to end up rejecting me. Why in Deuteronomy 32:47, Moses explained why they must take seriously God's inspired word. It's interesting to me as when God is letting Moses know some of these things, and he sees that. So if you look at 32 and you go to verse 47, we'll real quickly look at that. It's kind of like as he looks ahead, as he sees things happening, you can almost see his mind playing out how this is all going to play. And he says to them, "For it is no empty word for you, but your very life, and by this word you shall live long in the land that you are going over into the Jordan to possess." It's your choice how long you live if you follow God. Now, it's different now. We are no longer in that day of law. We are no longer in that day of pleasing God and living by the law. So it has changed that way. You're either saved or not saved. And does God take Christians at a young age? Absolutely. Why? We don't know. It's His choice. Their work on earth is done. But to these people, it's all about obeying the law. If you obey, if you continue to walk with God, I will bless you. If you turn your back to me, I will not bless you. And that's exactly what happened. So now we're not going to go back here, but Numbers 20, 1 through 13, Why was God not allowing Moses to go into the land for? What did Moses do that was wrong? Do you remember that story? He struck the rock instead of speaking to it. Now, if you take both times that water came out of the rock, how did it come out of the rock the first time? It was struck. But the second time, God said, speak to it. But Moses, in his frustration and anger, struck it. And what I will tell you is God does hold leaders more accountable than the common man. And what God did, it's kind of what happened in the New Testament to Ananias and Sapphira. What is God teaching the people through Moses vicariously? If you don't obey, I will not reward you. Now, that's what the law was based on. Understand that. Everything about the law, if you read through the law and all the laws, and there's so many, it's unreal. It's enough to give you a headache. And yet, God, that's the way he chose to do it. It was a different currency than the time we are in. Same ideas, but different currency. Go ahead.
I still found it interesting, though, that God, water came out of the rock.
Right.
He struck it, he disobeyed, but God graced the Israelites still with water. And so, even though I think that's something that I've learned, it's a law of obedience and a reward of the Old Testament, but grace is still very evident even in the law.
Yes. For one thing, those people would have died if the water didn't come out of the rock. So God is saving the people even though Moses disobeyed how he did it. And I will tell you, and this is all the way through Scripture, did God himself understand the frustration Moses was under? You bet he did. So he didn't strike him dead right there, which he could have. He allowed him to live, and he allowed him to continue to lead the children of Israel. The one thing he took away from him was the promised land. And yet, my guess is if you would talk to Moses today when you get to heaven and you sit down and talk to Moses, he would think it was a very justified thing that God did to not let him go into the land. And he would tell you, what I have gotten from God in eternity is way better than the promised land was. And that is still on play for us. Whatever we're going through now, something is coming that's way better. Go ahead.
The thing I always get out of this story is that I want a list of rules, like when you want water, hit the rock, or when you want, and it's so much more about relationship, that God doesn't care what we do, he cares that we are asking him every
Right.
time we want it, and that's really hard.
It is hard. Obedience is hard because, well, first of all, we're walking with an unseen God. So that's hard in itself. The good thing we have is we do have his word. And we can take these stories and we can put them together, and we can put them together with the New Testament and see, what does he expect of me now? How does he look at things today compared to how he did things then? First of all, I don't have to offer sacrifices because my sacrifice, one sacrifice was offered for me. That also tells me I need to constantly remind myself that in God's sight, I am righteous. And there's the difference that, to me, it's a huge difference, is that it's not how I act all the time, it's that God sees me through his son. And that's the promise that was to come. But yeah, it amazes me, some of the stuff that he allowed people to do and didn't allow people to do. But again, if you're in leadership, you are expected to follow God even closer than the normal person. So anytime you're leading, even in a home, even with kids, you're the leader, more is expected of you. And that sometimes becomes very hard. Who buried Moses? God himself. Just one second. To this day, we still don't know where Moses was buried because we know what was going to happen if they would have known. What would have happened? Worship Moses. They would have taken the body and it would have gone into the land with them and it would be worshipped forevermore. That's not what God wanted. It was not Moses that needed to be worshipped. It was God. So go ahead.
I was just thinking about the comment that you made about leadership in the home as parents. And I remember with my disgruntled son, and every time I tried to enforce boundaries, that I just told him, I said, I have an accountability to God and not to you, and I need to do this because I need to answer to God for that. And I remember one time he was having a breakdown, a meltdown, and I was at the kitchen sink, and I was praying, as I usually do silently when these things happened, and he yelled at me. He said, "And don't you pray about this."
I think all of our kids probably thought that at times. Meltdowns or not. The good thing is, and I look at this even through Moses' eyes. So Moses was kind of a father to these children. And yet, God the Father told Moses that your children, my children, are going to rebel against me. When they become adults and they take over the land, they're going to get into the land and they're going to start worshiping. The one nice thing that I look at, God expects you to be a leader in your home while your kids are in the home. But once your kids leave the home, you are relieved of that responsibility. It is their choice then, and you need to give them the grace to live life as they see fit, even if they blow it. And that is the graceful love of God. He knows they're going to blow it. He knew the children of Israel were going to blow it. I think if I were God, if I put myself in God's place at this point, I probably would have killed them way back when they rebelled 40 years ago. But he let them go 40 years in the desert, and now he's got them ready to go into the land again. He's telling Moses, these same kids that are going to the land are going to rebel against me, and they're going to get taken out of the land. I'm going to turn my back on them. I keep saying to God, okay, why didn't you just take them out then? Why didn't you just start over? And then I think to myself, because you already did with Noah, that didn't work. People are always going to reject you. And that is the world we live in, including myself. How many times in my life have I rejected God by either not speaking to him, turning my back on him, being angry with him, whatever, and yet he is so patient and he is so graceful and loving and says, go ahead, have your little hissy fit, but I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. That is amazing. Any questions on what we just studied as we see them ready to go into the land? Wait, say it into the mic.
I just hate this. Okay, verse 6 says that God buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Moor, so he does give us an idea where he was buried, but not...
Go look that up on a map and see if you can figure out where he buried him.
Oh, okay.
It's like going into the Rocky Mountains and saying, okay, somewhere in here you're buried. I'll start digging. Good luck. And if God buried him, how deep do you think he put him? God doesn't have to dig like we dig. God could put him in the ground at 100 feet and no one would ever find him. But that is God. That was God's prerogative because he knew exactly, and even in that, why did God bury him? Because he knew the people were going to dishonor God and worship Moses, just like they did the calf in the desert. I mean, it's like every time you let people alone, they drift to a different place. They drift, and we've all done it. If we look at ourselves in the mirror and say, how many times have I drifted away from God? How many times have I just not spent much time with God because I don't feel like it, or I'm too busy? Or other things have come into my life that I'm more busy with, or I get distracted. We all do it. So we can't just blame them. We're just at fault. So let's talk about Jerusalem. So next page, go over to page 208. Coming into Joshua now. So go ahead and turn to Joshua 3. Oh. Consecrate, it's set yourself aside. So consecrate yourself meant you did, if you go into the law, so like when a good place to look at this, and I think it's in the beginning of Numbers, I know it is in Deuteronomy, it's when they consecrated themselves, like when the Levites were consecrated, they washed themselves, they basically put on clean clothes, they made themselves clean before God. So consecrating is setting myself apart. So for us to be consecrated in this day and age, it would be means I have confessed all my sins to God today. Anything that I have done that I feel like is breaking relationship with us, I've asked his forgiveness for. I am consecrated. I am set aside. I am ready to meet God, if that makes sense. But that's what they did. So get yourself ready to go into the land. It was also a mental mindset. It's setting yourself apart from the world. It's saying, I will do what I need to do to listen to God and to be with God. And that's what we're getting into. So verse 5 of Joshua, then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Now, he didn't say what the wonders were, but unless you obey God and consecrate yourselves, set yourself apart, make yourself clean. I mean, it went into little things too, like not having sex that night. I mean, if you go into the laws of the Levites, there were certain things they could not do when they were going to serve in the temple. That was just a fact of life. In fact, when you get into the time of Christ, they no longer lived in Jerusalem. They lived in areas all around Israel, and they stayed away from Jerusalem until they went to serve there, and they left their wives at home, so they were never distracted, so they were consecrated to work for God. It's literally being so single-minded, so focused on God that everything of the world just kind of falls away for that day. It's like, I am going to focus on obeying everything God tells me to do. This is an interesting one. So when you get into Joshua 3 and you get a little bit farther down, and you kind of all know the story, where did the ark go? How did the ark center into this? It's huge. What did they do with the ark? And your next question. Yeah, they were to follow behind the ark. The ark always went first. It's interesting once you get into the land, you get here to the Jordan, you do, when they were fighting, when Joshua fought Jericho, in Jericho, the ark always went first. It's almost like when they went out with the tabernacle and they took everything down and everything was, they were all following, the ark was in the middle of the people, and the Levites were in the middle of the people. All of the tribes went out, back, forth, and on the sides, so that the tabernacle stuff was in the midst of the people as they walked. Something changes once they get into the land. Once they get into the land, God makes a different rule for the ark. What does the ark always do in the land? It's always to lead. It's you follow the ark. Because if you follow the ark, what are you following? God. God hovers over that ark. So the whole idea of that, you know, I'm a visual person, so when I read, I'm always visualizing stuff. So in the desert, that cloud over them, or the fire at night, reminded them God was always in their midst. But when you come to the time of fighting in Joshua, that cloud is no longer there. It's all about the ark. And God just expects them to follow the ark and to make sure that they are following that ark, because with that, then they know God is leading them. Go ahead.
So whenever I saw like VeggieTales or whatever of the ark going around Jericho, it was uncovered, but based on what we've been talking about, it's actually never been uncovered when it's in transit. So because no one was supposed to look at it, right? So the Israelites never actually, even when they were following the ark, they never saw the gold of the ark or the cherubim.
We honestly don't know. It's not told in Joshua. Joshua doesn't tell us if they took everything off of it to follow it. Most of the pictures I've ever seen has everything off of it, that they actually followed the ark. But you're right. During the desert years, the wanderings, they never, ever saw the pieces. In fact, like I said, if you read Numbers 1 through 4, you'll figure out how they took the whole place down. And it was Aaron and his 2 sons that had to cover all the stuff in the Holy of Holies, in the holy place, and in the outer place. And once they had them all covered, then the other Levitical tribes could come in and pick up their part. You know, one tribe was for all the posts and the beams. The other tribe was for the outer stuff. Another tribe was for the inner, the Holy of Holies and the holy place. They all had their jobs to do, but you're right, they weren't covered. Joshua's it's very hard to know what actually happened here because it doesn't really say how they carried it. I will tell you what they did do. They did carry it on their shoulders. So again, it wouldn't have been hard to follow because they would have been behind it, looking up, not looking down, which normally stuff is on the ground. When it's on someone's shoulders, it's a lot easier to see. So it was a lot easier to follow. But we don't know if it was covered or uncovered. God doesn't tell us that. The point is, that's where God is, and that's who they were following at that point. They weren't following Moses. They weren't following Joshua. They were following the ark, which, yeah, you get into some of that stuff, and it's very interesting. So when you look at this next part, just below these questions, when they're following behind, go down to the middle of the page where that's kind of indented. She says, the walls of Jericho did come tumbling down as recounted in the Bible according to the archaeological study. When we compare the archaeological evidence at Jericho with the biblical narrative describing Israelite destruction of Jericho, we find remarkable agreement, said archaeologist Bryant G. Wood of the University of Toronto. Now, this guy may not be a Christian. He just is following archaeology wherever it goes. Scholars, by and large, have written off the biblical record as so much folklore and religious rhetoric, Wood said. However, extensive ceramic remnants and carbon-14 samples support the biblical account. The correlation between the archaeological evidence and the biblical narrative is substantial. As described in Joshua 6, Joshua's army marched around the city for a week, blowing ram's horns, and on the 7th day combined shouting with the piercing horns, and the walls fell flat. If you go to Jericho today, you can start to see some of the ruins that are still there. But literally, everything that they have dug up is literally flattened and broken. It's not in big pieces like something that you smash through. It is literally all in tiny little pieces. God flattened it himself. If they did it the right way, which that time they did. And then the next one, which we know about, they didn't. They did it the wrong way, and someone sinned, and they lost because of it. So again, God is teaching them obedience at all costs. Go to Judges 2, which we're kind of there. We're just a little bit ahead of that. I think this is an interesting, and I've seen this in people groups before, even in our own time, but Judges 2, 7, and 8, and 10, if someone wants to read those 3 verses for us, that will give us a little bit to go on. It's not too long.
The people worshiped the Lord throughout Joshua's lifetime and during the lifetimes of the elders who outlived Joshua. They had seen all the Lord's great works, for he had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. That whole generation was also gathered to their ancestors. After them, another generation rose up who did not know the Lord or the works he had done for Israel.
Okay, so you really answered 3 questions out of that whole passage. One is through the lifetime of Joshua, they served the Lord. They had a leader that reminded them that the Lord came first, not Joshua, not the people, God. Then you get to the point where Joshua dies. How old was he? 110. So he didn't make it to 120. Got it? His job was done at 110, which I think he was probably glad for. Then you get to this next part. After his death, what happened? Now look at the wording of what that verse said. Not that they just didn't follow God. What happened? Why didn't they follow God? They didn't know him. So what happened within the people group at that point? Think it through. They were no longer sharing the stories of what happened in the desert or when they entered the land. So this whole children that went into the land, offspring of the ones that died in the desert, come into the land, they conquer the land, they do what they're supposed to do, they follow God. Joshua dies, it starts to die down a little bit, but then every elder that had seen what God had done in the desert ends up dying off, and what they say about the church is the same of there. Every generation, the whole thing could collapse if someone's not telling the story. If I don't tell my kids a story, that generation goes unsaved. If they don't tell their kids a story, that generation, every generation has to pass it off to the next generation, even into our time. That's our responsibility. And when the people stop talking about God and following God, it's interesting to me, the whole group turns. And that's where you get into the time of Judges. If you want an interesting book to read this summer, after going through all this stuff in Exodus and on, go read Judges, and you'll be appalled at what they become. They are absolutely horrendous. And you go, how could they go from this to this? And yet, that's exactly what happens.
I was digging out of curiosity with the walls falling down. And I was reading, it's like 15 feet for one wall. It was 6 feet thick, and then there was another wall 15 feet above that on the inside. But yet archaeology said the whole wall fell out, which logically shouldn't happen.
No.
I thought that was really cool.
Well, and not only the wall, you just said there was two walls. One of them was wide enough that chariots could go around it, because that's how they protected their city. And we know Rahab lived on the wall, so not only was it a wall for protection, but people lived on that wall. And yet all of it came tumbling down, both sets, and flattened, like only God could do, right? And the people did nothing. All they did was yell. That would have been nice. Maybe if I yell louder, God will hear me. No, I'm kidding. But if you follow God, when he tells you to do something, the reward will come at some point. Now, remember, they had to do it for 7 days, and they had to trust he was going to do it. They couldn't just go around at once and say, okay, we're done with this. We're not going to go on. They trusted God, and he did it. And yet, within this same passage, it tells us that they are going to go totally off in a totally different direction away from God, which is really sad. So going into the next page, once they get into the land, and we talked a little bit about this last week, where was the temple set up, or the tabernacle set up before the temple was built? Shiloh. Shiloh was the place that they ended up putting that in. Then in 1 Samuel, when you're getting into the time of the kings, 21, they move it to a different place. Where did they move it to? Nob, another town. Yeah, it's on the top of page 210 in your book. It's interesting as you watch the progression here. She says the worn and misused tent was nothing but a shell without the glory of the God who had once graced it. God revealed himself through chosen faithful servants, but never again in a sanctuary until he raised up a man for his own heart, which was David. It's almost like once they got into the land, and you get through the book of Judges and what happened there, at that point, God has withdrawn himself from them. He will visit them occasionally when they cry out to him, and he will pick a leader who will go and fight for them, but it's very hit and miss. More often than not, if you read the book of Judges, you're appalled at how little you hear about God until they are so desperate. And some of it can be 40 years, it can be 70 years, whatever. You go through these large periods of time where God is not even talked about. And then all of a sudden, they're in deep trouble, and they call out to God, and he comes and rescues them. And it's a very interesting look. And then you get all the way through Saul when they wanted a king, and what God told Samuel is they're not rejecting you as a leader, they're rejecting me as their king. Go ahead and give them a king if that's what they want. They did. Saul, he blew it. He got it taken away. Then you get to David, and David was a man after God's own heart. And then things changed for a period of time, and the temple was thought about again. David tried to bring, and finally did, the tabernacle into Jerusalem. He did it the wrong way the first time, someone died. Second time they did it the right way. God is back in the center of his people again. But then you get to Solomon, where he builds a temple and God resides in that temple. And then at the end of Solomon's reign, you do not see God ever gracing anything again until you get to Matthew, where the Messiah comes into the temple being held as a baby. Just how God did it. If you follow me, if you'll obey me, if you'll have an intimate relationship with me, I will be with you. If you're going to go your own way, I am not going with you. And that's exactly what he did. Any questions on that?
But again, in today's economy of grace, that makes it all the more remarkable that that even if I choose to, after, I don't even know how to say it, but after giving my life to the Lord and then walking away, I'm still His.
Mm-hmm.
And how remarkable is that? That I have a hard time grasping that.
And I think we have a hard time grasping that because we do not understand how significant Christ's blood is in our lives. When you took that on, when you said, I accept your sacrifice to get me into God's good graces and into heaven, what we don't really understand is that's a once and for all decision, and from that point on, he sees you as perfect, even when you're very, very imperfect. That's the difference. And that's actually what this next whole passage, the true tabernacle, top of page 211. She talks about the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And she talks about the dwelt is the same word that comes from tabernacle. It's the same Hebrew word. He tabernacled among us. He lived among us. This is John talking. Now, John was Jewish. He understood the Jewish Old Testament. And what he's saying is this Messiah literally became the tabernacle among us. He set himself in the midst of us so that we could see the tabernacle once again. And it perfected it. So next paragraph down, well, go to a couple of these. Christ, the Son of God, the complete embodiment of God's word, came to tabernacle among us, which is John 1:14. What's the purpose of the tabernacle of testimony built by heavenly design in the wilderness? It was a dwelling place in which to behold God's glory among the prophets. How much greater then was God's glory displayed in the true tabernacle? It's interesting, if you go to, keep your finger here in Joshua, but go back into Hebrews. Hebrews is the one book in our New Testament that really, really talks a lot about the Jewish way of life, the Jewish law, the Jewish, everything Jewish. It compares it to everything Jewish. So it's usually, when you read Hebrews, and if you don't get the point of Hebrews, Hebrews is comparing Christ, the Messiah, to everything else in the Old Testament. And he compares it to angels, he compares it to the law, he compares it to everything. But if you go to Hebrews 1, it says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, now catch that, many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, so the last days started when Christ came, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. So Christ was not only the Son, but he was also the creator of the whole world. He spoke it into being. He is the radiance, and the He there is Christ, is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. And he upholds the universe by the word of power, and making purification for sins, he sat down, and sitting down means he's resting at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he was inherited is more excellent than theirs. The whole idea of God tabernacling among us came in the view of Christ. When the church started, when you're getting into Hebrews now, and every chapter has stuff that will refer you back to certain things that happened in the past, it will help you understand how significant his life was. And then what did he do when he left? He says, don't leave Jerusalem until I come to you in the way of the Spirit. And at that point, God tabernacled among us by being in us. And that's amazing. You are the tabernacle. You host the God of glory. That same glory that came down into the tabernacle, into the temple, literally lives in your life. And what does he say about that? I will never leave you or forsake you. And it doesn't have any qualifications. I will never leave you as long as you obey me. That's what he said to Israel, but he doesn't say that to us. I will never leave you as long as you spend time with me each day. I will never leave you as long as you come to church every Sunday. I will never leave. It's no, I will never leave you or forsake you, period. There are no qualifications to it. And that's what she's talking about. It's so amazing to think. Even when you're at your worst, he sees you as perfect because he sees the glory of God in you. I mean, that should humble all of us. Say, you got to say that into the mic, because I didn't hear it, and I know no one else did probably either.
But it grieves him when we sin.
Yeah, it doesn't make him happy, but like a parent, when your 2-year-old threw a temper tantrum, did you love them any less? No. I think we don't even come close to his kind of love. His kind of love says, even though you're not doing what I want you to do, I still love you with everything I've got. I am still in you. I am not leaving you. You cannot break that relationship with God because it's on him. It's kind of like what he did with Abraham. If he was the one that made the covenant with himself, not with Abraham. Abraham never walked the covenant. We never walked the covenant. The only thing we did was say, I will accept your sacrifice, your payment. That's all we did. And from that point on, you are his and he will not leave you, even when you sin. Because then he'd be leaving us every day, wouldn't he? If we're honest. Okay, Muggsy's got a question? Okay, make a statement.
Okay. We struggled with this in some other studies, and one thing I remember you telling us, I believe it was you told us this, that we don't lose our salvation, but we lose our witness when we walk in sin.
Absolutely. I mean, how can you be a witness if I'm living in sin? I mean, if I'm crabby, or I'm doing something, I'm gossiping, I'm doing whatever, the people who are listening to me, who see me, will say, wow, she's not living like a Christian, she's a hypocrite, which I am. More often than not, I am. We're all hypocrites. That's the whole point. That's not how he sees us. He sees us as perfect. And that's the other part we cannot wrap our minds around. So yes, you do lose that. So if she has a couple other verses, bottom of that kind of 1 to 11, this tabernacle was planned before the foundation of the world was established in 1 Peter 1:20. Understand that this was not a desperation play by God. The tabernacle was thought about. His death was already decided. Everything was in place the day that Adam and Eve sinned. He already knew it. Go ahead.
It is, I will never leave you nor forsake you, is also in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy. He's speaking to Joshua and says, do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave or forsake you. So how does that
So look at Joshua's life. Did God ever leave Joshua or forsake him?
Was it specific to Joshua?
Yes, it was.
Got it.
Because Joshua was taking over the headship. Just like he said to Moses, go back to Moses in the desert. What did he say to him? I will be with you, period. No qualifications, nothing on that. He was with Moses to the very end and buried him. Same thing he said to his next leader. I will be with you. Don't be afraid. Because he knew it was going to be a huge job to lead these hard-headed people into any kind of victory because they were very, very stiff-necked and proud. So, yes, that was a specific promise. Because you don't see that promise to Israel itself. What you see to Israel, and you'll see it over and over in the Old Testament, even though I'm pushing you away and I'm turning my back on you, I will again turn my face toward you and bring you back into the land. I will go before you and I will love you again. But right now, you're outside my love. That's the difference between law and grace. And if you don't catch that, you'll never understand the gift you've been given in grace. I don't have to act a certain way to keep God with me. They did. Hebrews 10, 5 through 7 down below here in 2:11. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. And I said, here I am. It is written about me in the scroll, I have come to do your will, O God. That is taken actually out of the Old Testament. It's talking about Christ. It's talking about his willingness to be the once and for all sacrifice. Because what happened with the sacrifices, and you can see it in the time of Christ, the heart isn't in it. People were doing it out of, when we talk about legalism and tests, when you were saying, I wish you just some rules, what God would say to you if you stood before him, I tried that. It doesn't work. I gave them the rules. They don't do it. I grew up with a lot of rules, and I realized the more rules you have, the more rules that are made. And the more rules that are made, the more rules that are made. And the more rules, and the more rules. You get to the time of Christ. How many different laws had they enacted to describe the rules? Just the Sabbath alone, there had to be 10 or 15 different laws written after the law to explain what Sabbath meant. And yet God said, the Sabbath was meant for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, you guys are making something out of it that was never supposed to be. You're not supposed to worship the Sabbath. You're supposed to enjoy it, rest in it. They had totally gotten it wrong. The hearts weren't in it. So again, he changes. God didn't change. It was all planned because I had it explained to me once. Actually, it was a pastor that I have known for years because he's married to my cousin. And so we've been friends since I was a kid. And we used to sit and go back and forth with each other. And there's one time we started going about what God was going to say in heaven when we stand before him. And one of the things is he says, well, people are going to say, well, if you just would have given me a perfect place and there wasn't any temptations, I could have done all right. I wouldn't have been like Eve. And he said, no, we tried that. It didn't work. And then I said, yeah. And then you get to the law, and we all say, well, if you just give me a few rules to follow, I could do that. I could be good for you if you just give me a few rules. We tried that. It didn't work. So you go all the way through history, all the things that God tried to bring people to himself, the sacrifices, all this stuff. It never worked because the people's hearts weren't in it until he takes over your life and takes your heart and says, I'm in you forever. I will not leave you. Otherwise, we're always trying to jump through some hoops. We're trying to earn it ourselves. And that's religion. That's not relationship. Does that make sense to everybody? Can you see why he did what he did? Jumping ahead to day 4. We are going to go through these verses. So someone want to read 1 Corinthians 3:16. I need 4 readers. If I don't know who wants to do it, I'll just... who wants to do 1 Corinthians 3:16? It's only one verse, not hard. Okay, I need someone for 1 Corinthians 6:19. Who wants to do that one? All right. 2 Corinthians 6:16. All right. Muggsy, did you say that? Okay. And then Ephesians 2:21 and 22. Who wants to do that one? Okay, so we've got 4. So, okay, 1 Corinthians 3:16.
Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst?
So when you get together as a church, God's Spirit is here, and as many people that are saved, that have His Spirit in them, that has become His temple, their lives. He says that to a church that was very broken and very sinful, which is interesting to me. Of all the churches that he wrote to, Corinthians had the most problems. And yet, this is the church he said, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Okay, 1 Corinthians 6:19.
Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own.
And then it goes on to say you were bought with a price. The price he bought me with was his blood. And that allowed him to come and live in my life, where I then become the same temple that Solomon built, only different. But the same glory of God that dwelt in that temple dwells in me. Okay, Muggs? 2 Corinthians 6:16.
What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will live with them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people.
So again, it's that idea that to these Corinthians who were in a mess, saying, you are the temple. He is with you. He is going to lead you. He's not going to leave you. Just keep moving forward. And then lastly, Ephesians 2:21 and 22.
In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit.
Okay, so if you look at each other, if you've all accepted Christ and accepted his sacrifice, you are part of that temple. You are part of the foundation. You are part of that thing that is being built. As we're here today, we become a bigger temple than when we go home alone. We become a little bit smaller temple. The whole point of meeting together is to encourage each other. Page 214. I'm not going to read Psalm 139 because we've done that several times, even within these passages. But the whole point that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, that God had a plan for you from the day he created you, that you were already named and in his mind chosen before the foundations of the world. Before he ever created the earth or the universe, you were already in his head. He already knew you. That should amaze you also. And then he made you, he put you in a specific time, a specific place, in a specific era, and said, now live for me. Be my temple. Show people what it's like to be a temple. It's amazing. When we traveled to the Middle East, when we were coming into Egypt for the first time, and you have to kind of see Egypt to kind of get the idea behind it. Egypt's a very, very, very poor country, and it is. There are masses of people everywhere. If you are in the streets, you just are amazed at the number of people walking, riding bikes, donkeys. I mean, you've got cars flying by at high speeds, and then you've got donkeys and ox carts and everything else. The bus passes them all, and you're going, oh my word, how does this ever work? You would find buses going by with literally people hanging out the back, out the windows, everywhere. There's just people everywhere. And the poverty is just unimaginable. And our leader, which happened to be my cousin's husband, he just said, some of you are going to feel guilty because you come from the West and you have a lot more than these people do. But if you feel guilty, what you're doing is spitting at God's gift to you. He chose you to be born in the States, to be born by the parents you were born in, to live the way you are, to glorify him. He chose them to live in Egypt. There should not be within Christians any pride in that or any looking down at other people because they were not born into it. It is all God's choice. And that helped me immensely because when you're in those kind of places, all you can think of is how much. And my life wasn't easy as a kid growing up. We didn't have all that much. And yet I had way more than any of the people that we saw. And I just realized, wow, It was your choice. You chose me. And I am a missionary to my generation here in this area. As long as I live until I die, that is my job. That's where he's placed me. So again, it's all about him. It's not about us. It's his choices, his ideas. Go to 1 Corinthians 5. Did I say Corinthians? I meant Thessalonians. Sorry. Top of page 215, Thessalonians. I'm thinking, what did I say that for? Okay. 1 Thessalonians 5:23. It's kind of Paul's last words to this church in Thessalonica. And he is kind of wrapping up everything he's written about. And he says, now may the God of peace himself sanctify you. In other words, make you holy, set you aside, sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. He who calls you is faithful. Who will do it? Is it Diane that does it? No. Look at that last phrase. He will surely do it. He's assuring the church in Thessalonica that as long as they've accepted Christ as their own and his sacrifice, that he will continue to sanctify them until he takes them to heaven. They will be made perfect. Body, soul, and spirit. And that's a whole class in itself to explain what those three things are. And I'm not going to get into it today because we don't have time, but it's very interesting. And then the next question, is one component more or less important than all the others? No. They're all listed. So my body is as important to him as my soul and spirit. Now, again, he's coming out of the time where there was a certain group of people that said the body was nothing. Everything in the physical world was sinful, and you just ignored it. And you live life in I don't even know what, spirit and soul. Problem is, that's not what God says. He says, your spirit and soul and body are all mine. You are made with me in you in all things. It's why we take care of our bodies. It's why we don't just let them go to seed. Well, sometimes we do, but we try not to. We try to stay as healthy as we can. We don't beat ourselves up. You read stories about people who are trying to please God and will literally have themselves put on a cross to try to mimic him, or beat themselves with whatever, I don't even know what they call them, where it'll literally tear up their whole back because they're trying to please God. That's never, ever what God asks of you. All he asks of you is to be a shining light that his spirit can shine through your life. Body, soul, spirit. Any questions on that? So all of me is encompassed in him. All of me has him in it. He takes all of me. Any questions on what that day talked about? Like I said, as we get into the end here, there's not quite as many verses, not quite as much stuff that we have to get through. Okay, day 5. Okay, go ahead.
I would like to comment on page 215. I don't know if it's a comment, it's just I agree with it. The tabernacle had to be maintained such care because it enclosed the very glory of God. Motivation that must remain ours as well. The discussion is not about looks, size, or weight. It's about authority. Can you openly acknowledge God as master over your entire being? That was well written.
Mm-hmm. And he's not asking us, okay, if this makes you feel better as women, he's not asking you to go out and run a marathon to keep your body in shape. That isn't even what he's talking about. He's not talking about in shape bodies. She's right. he's not talking about looks, size, whatever. What he's talking about is my whole body under the authority of Christ? Can they see him when I'm around? And some days they can, and some days they can't, if we're honest. And that's just the way it ends up playing out.
So when I was little, I thought the greatest thing, I had a lot of unique thoughts when I was little, but one of them was that I thought, the greatest thing to be would be a martyr for Christ, because that would be the greatest expression of love. And so I can understand the Islamic mindset in that, because it made sense to me. But now as I grow up and like you were describing, some people would try to self-inflict harm to experience and work to bear that with God. If you'll just walk with him long enough, he'll do that in your life for you. You don't have to look for it. And it's actually the less glory. I think that's the part of the martyr syndrome, is the glory that you can get from that, from others admiring your faith. But it's really the daily silent faithfulness and surrendering that no one sees. That's the harder part, and I think that can get lost when we, in our world, for seeking glory, even in a Christianese way.
Right. It's interesting, if you've ever read the Book of Martyrs, and it's been a long time since I've read it, but I read it as a kid, probably as a high schooler, and then earlier in life I've read bits and pieces. I haven't read the whole thing again, but one of the parts it talks about martyrdom is that what they found, and they found this through the early church, well into the Middle Ages, those who wanted to be a martyr were the ones that would end up not dying and would chicken out and would recant their salvation. Those who God chose to martyr were the ones that could stand it and do it. And I thought that was so interesting to me as a young person. I thought, so if my idea is I should be a martyr for God, and that's not God's idea, that's never going to fly. First of all, I'm going to chicken out, and even if I do die, it's never going to glorify him, because he's never asked me to do it. And I've also shortened my life, so any job he would have had for me to do is not going to get done, because I'm gone now. And yet, when you are called to be a martyr, there does seem to be some, and story after story talks about how some of these people made it through the martyr part, to be burned at the stake, to be, torn in two, do all these other things, horrible things they did to them, and never recant Christ's name. And that to me is amazing. I go back to, in our recent past, those 13 young men on the beach that all had their heads taken off. And back in their country, the people that are Christians that knew them are so proud of them, because none of them recanted their testimony of loving God and serving Christ. The fact is, God got them through that. They are now in heaven, and that other people could see that actually happened. And we know from the early church, martyrdom was often the way the church spread, because they were amazed at what these people were willing to die for. And that's amazing. And yet sometimes he calls you to die in a different way. He may die to dreams. I have a dream to do this, and God says, nope, I don't want you there. And you have to give that up. Or a dream to be married, or to have kids, or to whatever. I mean, there's so many dreams we have as we're young and as we get older. And, as I look back at my life, some of my dreams came through, but a lot of them did not. A lot of them just never materialized. Can I give them up for Christ? Yeah. That's part of being a martyr too, is I trust him with my stuff, not me. I don't know where I'm going, he does, and I have to follow him. Which, like I said, easy to say, hard to do sometimes. Next page. I like what she does in this, and I'm going to go through it quickly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I think most of you had filled it out. 1 Corinthians 15:6, what number is given that there's a specific number that we're given? Did you get that one? 500. By what name does God call these people? Yeah, brothers and sisters in Christ. So they are his, in quotes, family. What does that mean? the brothers here that they're talking about are those who see and believe that Jesus was Messiah. They could be Jews, they could be Gentiles, they could be all kinds of different backgrounds, but that's who they were. Then in Luke 10, he gives you another number. What number is that? 72. So it's a smaller number. You've gone from 500 to 72. So it talks about who are they? What insight do we receive about their depth of intimacy? What did he tell them to do? He sent them out to witness about him, the Messiah, 2 by 2. Never alone, always 2 by 2. So they were close enough to him to get an assignment and to carry it out. So you've got the bigger group who wasn't given an assignment, but he saw them as brothers. And then you've got a smaller group who were called, and they went out 2 by 2. And then the next one is what? Matthew 26, what are they? 12 disciples. How many were there? 12. Problem is, one of them doesn't go along, so you end up with 11 that actually do the right thing. But they became even closer in. They were the ones that were with him 24/7. They traveled everywhere with him. They knew all of his teachings. They understood who he claimed to be. They believed he was who he claimed to be. Peter's the one that said it out loud, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." They knew that. They were close enough, they were up close enough to know him personally and to have that relationship with him. And then she goes to the last group, and how many were there in this? 3. They were the ones that were the innermost friends. Interestingly enough, so name the 3. Peter, James, and John. What do you know about James? He was one of the first martyrs. Even though he was the closest, he was John's brother. Even though he was one of the closest 3, God took his life very early. In fact, we read nothing about his ministry anywhere. No. You listen and don't write. Just listen. Don't write. Whose brother was he? Peter, James, John's brother. James and John, sons of thunder. Same dad. Fishermen. And yet when you find him in Scripture, not very long after Christ goes back, he's one of the first ones put in prison and had his head taken off. He had no ministry. And I really want to stress that, because it wasn't because he was a better guy. It wasn't because he was whatever, or he failed at witnessing. God makes those choices on when someone lives or dies. But it's interesting to me that out of the 3 closest to Christ that knew him the best, the most intimate, one of them dies early on, which tells me it's more about these men being willing to be the closest to Christ and intimate than it does about anybody else. So what she's trying to get across to you is you're going to have to decide how close you get to the Christ. You can be part of the 500, part of the bigger church, and you'll do fine. You'll be okay. You'll go to heaven, no problems. But you're probably not going to have much influence. You can also be part of the 72 and be set out, and you're closer to Christ, and you go do his work, and that's great. But until you get to the 12 and then the 3, you don't really understand what intimacy is. And in our day and age, when Christ lives among us, in us, the only way to be intimate with him is how? In the Word, time alone with him. The same way if you got married ever, same way you dated your husband. Time alone. You got to know him. You talked. You told him your dreams. He told him his. You got to know him. You got to know his sense of humor. You got to know all this stuff about him. It's the same with Christ. It's your choice how close in you get. There was something in those three guys that Christ recognized that they were willing to come close, that the others were not. Go ahead.
I want to circle back and just question about Judas, because when you look at this tabernacle and how they needed to go in to have that experience of intimacy of the Holy of Holies, how did Judas get so far into God, into that? Because, I mean, he traveled. It's interesting because he wasn't one of the 500. He wasn't one of the 70. He was one of the 12.
But what do we know about Judas? What was he looking for? He wanted the kingdom. He was all about the kingdom. He thought Messiah was going to come as a king, throw out Rome, as did some of the others. James and John thought the same thing. Problem with Judas, well, first of all, you've got to go back in time. It says in Scripture, God chose Judas to be the one to betray him. So there's something in Judas that God himself saw that he knew was going to play out. So God needed someone to betray his own son, and it happened to be Judas. So there was something in his life that was, and you can see it almost in what he was doing. He became trusted member of the 12, and yet I think Christ knew, and obviously God knew, that he was stealing from the money. So when he went when he realized Christ was not going to do what he said he was going to do and be the king, what he thought God said he was going to do, he decided it wasn't worth it. He wanted the kingdom. He wanted what we would want if our country had been taken over by a group that were persecuting us. He'd want them out, and that's what he did. There was nothing wrong with that. The problem is he never saw the plan of God, and he was very into himself. It's interesting, the more I read Scripture through, what I realize about Judas, you really don't know much about him from Scripture. You don't know his personality. I mean, like I said, James and John, sons of thunder. We know a lot about Peter. We know quite a bit about Andrew. We know about some of the others, who doubted? Thomas. We all know that story. Judas, there's absolutely nothing about him. You really don't see anything. You see little tiny snapshots, like when Mary in Bethany poured her expensive perfume on his feet. And basically what Christ had anointed him for death. Judas saw that as that should have been sold and given to us to live on. Even though they had plenty to live on, they weren't starving to death. He never had the sight to see who Christ actually was. But neither did the high priest, who knew all of the Old Testament. So and I will tell you, and I've been around enough churches to know, in every single church I've ever been in, there are people there who look like Christians, but if you actually get to know their lives behind the scenes, they have not ever accepted Christ. They are living by rules, they're using all the right words, but they really have zero interest in Scripture. You don't see them at Bible studies, you don't see them asking questions, you don't really see them doing anything. They are just there because they know it's the right thing to do. And if you grew up in the age I did, which a lot of you did, what you saw is a lot of people going to church for absolutely no reason because they felt like they had to. But it's not to know Christ better. Unfortunately, even in today's church with Christians, I think sometimes we get the idea that if we come on Sunday mornings, we'll get our fill of Christ. That is not how it works. It's just like eating. If you only ate Sunday morning, you would starve to death the rest of the week and you wouldn't last very long. That's exactly what the Christian life is. The light can only shine brightly in you if you are reflecting Him, and the only way you can reflect Him is time with Him. So we've gone through this year. Next week, hopefully, I will do this last 2 pages, 20 and 21. What we've learned is every single piece of that tabernacle, Every single part of it all pointed to Christ. If someone asked you today, so how does the lampstand point to Christ, what would you say to them? I am the light of the world. If he said, what does the basin of water have to do with anything? Could you give him a quote of where it comes in Scripture and how Christ fulfilled it? I am the living water. Every single part of that tabernacle, every piece pointed to something he claimed for himself as Messiah and that we can bank on. That's why you can be the tabernacle to him now. He lives within you. You let your light shine as you go out from here. You be the difference maker. And sometimes we have to give up everything to do that. And that's a hard one. And yet, if I look at my little life here, if I live to 80, whatever, however long I live, compared to eternity, it's absolutely like a flick. It's nothing. I'll look back, my cousin and I sometimes on the phone, she's 10 years older than I am, we'll make jokes about 100 years from now and we're in heaven and we're going to be sitting there talking to each other and we're going to look back and say, wow, that life was just a nothing. Why did we get so upset over so many things? And then 1,000,000 years in, you're going to look back and say, I don't even know that I remember that much about my life. It was obviously very unimportant. And yet to God, you are important. That he would choose to live within you. That is amazing. Any questions before we close for today? Oh, you're all so quiet.
I like her question on 219. What would it mean for you to dwell in the Holy of Holies? And I think, obviously, that's a personal question, and I think it changes from season to season. But I think today I would say that to have God turn my grief into grace.
Mm-hmm.
Because the grief's got to go somewhere.
And the interesting thing about the world, there's always grief. There's always going to be grief. There's griefs that are larger than others. There's always going to be betrayals, friends betraying friends. There's always going to be upset. And it so much depends on who I'm living for. If I'm living for people, I'm always going to be upset. I'm always going to feel that rub. If I'm living for God, I will do what I feel like he is telling me to do. And who cares what people think? And I will tell you, it is hard sometimes to stand for God because you are looked down on. You're looked at like, are you an idiot? I mean, you're giving up so much stuff. But we really aren't. We are getting so much stuff. It's a whole different way of looking at things. But I think sometimes we hang on to stuff in this world way, way, way too tightly. And to be willing to give it up, to live for Christ, and to be who we were called to be, that becomes a very difficult situation. And yet, what greater reward than to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And to have something to lay at his feet that doesn't get burned up. Anyway, next week we'll finish. Take the time this week, since you don't have homework, to figure out what part of this book or what part of this study really meant something to you, that really made you see things differently. I was kind of doing that this week in some of my time, and I've taught this. This is the third time I've taught this. You'd think I'd know it by now, and yet I was amazed at how many things popped at me as I was restudying it to realize where my life is now and where it's going has a lot to do on what he's asking me to do. So it's, we are the temple. We are the new tabernacle. Go out and be that this week, Lord willing.